This morning I was doing a homeschooling activity with one of my kids, with my son, and we were talking about brain health. I had this little activity pack that had little different exercises to help improve your thinking processes, and it talked about how we organize our thinking, and how originally when we're developing our little neural map, we create boxes and labels to put things that we encounter out in the world into, so that we know later, if we encounter it again, we know what to do with it. And so this is what we do for our whole of our growing up life. We create these boxes and these labels so that we don't have to keep using a lot of energy to keep rediscovering what things are and what they can be used for, or what category to put them in. And this has a lot of obviously positive benefits. It saves us a lot of energy so that we don't have to spend all of our time trying to rediscover what things are. But it also has the downside that we do, once our categories and labels are created in our brain, we often spend the rest of our lives not questioning those categories. And the thing is, those labels and boxes were mostly given to us by other people, not things that we worked out for ourselves. Some things are a result of direct experience, but a lot of the labels are from other people, and language in itself is given to us by others. So we are told right from the beginning what to call things and what things are useful for. And so sometimes things wind up in a box that in our mind has negative connotations, when in fact we might not have had any direct experience with the thing itself or the group. And we just might live our whole lives thinking that something is that we need to steer clear of, without ever having any direct experience or self-evaluation of the thing in question. So that's where it can be a negative thing. So I want to talk about something that's come up in quite a few conversations with Christian friends and acquaintances in recent times for me, and that is this word here, which for at least the last maybe 1.5 thousand years has, for Christians, had negative connotations. So what's really important, I think, is we're at this juncture now where we are trying to reach a higher level of living together in the world. We talk about human equality, but we can see you only have to go to the news for 5 seconds to realize that this idea is lip service only. But one of the barriers to true human equality is, of course, the misunderstandings that we have and the negative labels that we put over other people that we see as different to ourselves. So let's just have a talk for a minute about the background. Let's just for a minute open that box called paganism and find out who gave us this label in the first place, why it became a negative label, and whether or not, let's just evaluate whether or not it should still be a negative label, or whether it's something that we might want to reevaluate. So go back, history of the word itself, pagan, you do an etymology search on pagan and it will tell you that originally it just meant villager, or someone who lived in the country, so a rustic person. So obviously that was a lot of people. You go back far enough and there were a lot of people living in the country as villagers. And what a lot of different, probably most tribes people and people, living in village settings in the dim distant past, and even still today, because their whole lives revolved around the seasons and the importance of living in balance with the seasons of nature. So to them, nature was the thing that mattered, and so it was paganism as a very broad brush term was simply people who celebrated the seasons and the cycles of nature. The other main difference that we would see between, say, modern Christianity and paganism of the past, or even of the present, was that they did not have a focus simply on a masculine deity. There was, nature was associated with the divine feminine, and so and not just nature per se, but there was this recognition in paganism that the divine essence wasn't just one gender, that there was always a feminine element, and so there was reverence and even worship for divine feminine goddesses, or just a highest goddess, as well as the masculine element as well. So pagans didn't just worship the divine feminine. Some groups of people in different places might have had more of a focus on the divine feminine, and I do admit that in a lot of places it was seen that the very, very highest in the hierarchy of this whole scheme of things was a feminine aspect. So the whole was seen as feminine, and anything coming down the chain, that's where the masculine could come into play. But often there was an understanding of the dualism, and that you needed the masculine and the feminine to work together for there to be creation, for there to be anything. So that's something that there is a difference with modern Christianity. Also, they tended to have other deities, lower deities that were represented different aspects of life and nature that they would also bring into their worship practices. So Christians past a certain point, and I'm going to talk about what that point was in a minute, looked at pagans as an erroneous practice because of the what they saw as polytheism, not just one God, as opposed to Christianity, which, talks about this idea of there being the one God. But it's not as cut and dried as that, and I'll tell you why it's not as cut and dried as that on either side of the fence. And but as an interesting point, it might be worth noting that Muslims, if you ask Muslims today with what they thought of paganism, they would include Christians as pagans, according to Muslims. So most Christians would balk at that and think, no, of course we're not pagans. We worship the one true God. But the reason that Muslims would say that is because of the idea of the Trinity, the triple God, the three in one, because they see that Allah is indivisible. So Muslims, Muhammad brought back, he came into a situation where there was, polytheism, there was multiple God worship and idolatry, and he brought everybody back to the idea that there is only really one true God. So the idea of the Trinity as accepted by most streams of Christianity today, that was actually cemented as a theological doctrine at the Council of Nice, or when they created the Nicene Creed. That was under the Roman Emperor Constantine. Now, I'll give you a little bit of background to Constantine if I've got time. He was so the Romans post Christ, there was a few centuries of persecution of Christians by the Romans. Most people know that. Intense persecution, a lot of executions. And it wasn't until Constantine that things took an interesting turn for the better for Christians, because he was head of a large portion of Rome was divided at that point, and he was engaged in a battle at Rome. He was outside Rome, engaged in battle trying to take over Rome. And there's several different accounts of exactly what happened, but at any rate, he had a vision which was reportedly shared by his army, soldiers in his army also had the same vision, where they saw a sign in the sky. I think it was in front of the sun, and it looked, they call it the hero. I'll draw it. That's not a very good drawing. I think I did it a little bit elongated. Anyway, maybe I'll do it again. I'll try again. Do a better one. That looks better. There's a better one. This one here. So it's two letters interposed on top of each other. So we've got the chi, which is that X cross. That's a Greek letter or Roman letter. And then you've got this one here, rho, which looks like a P for us. But anyway, this was an ancient symbol, but it came to represent Christ. The Christians were using it as a symbol of Christ because in Greek, this letter here, chi, was the first letter of the name of Christ, like chi, and then this makes an R sound, rho, so this was the first two letters of Christ's name. So he saw this symbol in the sky and heard the words that were later translated as, "In this sign conquer." So he got all of his army to emblazon their shields with this holy sign, and they did win the battle, and he ended up becoming emperor and later became emperor of the whole of the Roman Empire. So this was early 4th century. Then, and he had a vision of Christ that night too, who explained the meaning of the sign and told him that if he, paid deference to the highest God, then he would win, he would be successful in his campaign, which he was. So he became a Christian convert. Then he had this challenge that faced him because up until that point there'd been all this antipathy between the two groups, and suddenly he has to bring everybody around to integrating. So he ended persecution of the Christians, so ordered tolerance of Christian worship, and in 325, as an ongoing effort to help these, supposedly at odds religious factions come together in a peaceful, harmonious way, he had held a council, and it wasn't just bringing the Romans and the Christians together. Up until that point, this is what most Christians don't understand, is that Christian was not a standardized religion. It wasn't a standardized religion. There was different groups of Christians focusing on different things and having different takes on the gospel and the doctrines all over the Middle East and the whole empire. The whole of Christians everywhere were not necessarily in 100% alignment with one another, and there was no Bible as we have it today. That's where Constantine and his council came into things. There was just floating around. There was the writings of the apostles and other people who professed leadership sort of status in the Christian faith, who had written down their understandings and insights of Christ's teachings. And these, of course, because there was no printing press, so these were all just copied by hand and passed around and copied some more and passed around. So there was just all these hundreds and hundreds of floating copies of different texts. So Constantine decided that this situation was it was no good. It was too messy and too hard to control. So he wanted a system whereby he could bring everything into a coherent system that could be controlled and monitored and organized properly. The Romans were very, very good at organizing things. So he called all of these, ecclesiastical leaders together that he'd obviously okayed and appointed at some point. I haven't researched that quite enough yet, where these guys popped up from. And he said, right, we need to work out what's going to be okay for everybody to believe here, that we can keep control of. Also, we need to make sure that the Roman faction is catered for as well. So what they did was they actually took several pagan festivals and rebranded them for Christian worship. So this is another reason why Muslims see modern day Christians as pagan, because, you know, Christians celebrate festivals that were originally pagan festivals. I mean, Easter is a classic example. That was a celebration of the goddess of fertility, Oestre. I always talk about her at my Christian Easter festivals so that we all understand where it's all coming from. And anyway, there was a whole bunch of other festivals that were rebranded. So that brought everybody into alignment in terms of their holidays and their celebrations. And then they had to work out the doctrine side of things. So from a list of who knows how many, I think there was probably around 45 to 50 sort of more mainstream, if you want to call it, texts that were considered canonical, that were considered inspired revelation by almost all the Christians at the time, that were actually put on the banned list. That Constantine and his group of bishops decided, no good. There's doctrines in those that we don't like, and I'm not going to go into right now what those doctrines were. I'm going to cover those in other videos though. And interestingly, there was a lot of things that had been doctrines that had been around for a long time in those books that became contraband and branded heresy. So the 27 books that were left, Christian texts that were left, became the New Testament that we have now. So I'm not going to talk about the Old Testament side of things right now, but it's only just now that over the last sort of 100 years, that we've started, that these missing books that were declared heretical have been discovered. Because once they were declared heretical, if you were caught with a copy, you were executed. It was lights out for you. So they, people who considered these manuscripts sacred, they went to some effort to hide these. Well, mostly they just destroyed them for fear of death, but a lot of them were hidden up, and now they're coming to light. Now, I am a very middle of the road person, or I like to think that I find the place in the middle where where all of it comes together. So I, in common with a lot of people who speak in defense of these hidden texts, my belief is that everything happens for a reason. And I do actually believe that there is a divine being, God, whatever people want to call it. I don't mind what name people give to that highest intelligence that is actually leading us in the direction of an evolutionary path as a species, as a human species, that I do believe that there was divine purpose in us not having access to those writings for the period of time that we did. But I also believe that there is divine purpose in them coming forth now. And this is what I'm going to be unpacking over the course of time. I'm going to try and do these videos a little bit more often so that I can, because there's so much information out there. But yeah, I'm going to be talking about what was uncovered in the Nag Hammadi library, what the Dead Sea Scrolls had to add to our knowledge of, pre-Christian biblical history, because there's a lot to unpack there too. Anyway, there's a lot to unpack everywhere, but the point is, we really just need to be careful with our assumptions, and we need to be checking to make sure that the labels that we put on things, if they've just been handed to us from past generations, and especially if it's causing division or judgment of other people, that we really need to be willing, for our own sake, for the sake of humanity, to reassess and work out whether these judgments are accurate or fair, or need to be discarded, and for the sake of moving towards healing as a whole species. So yeah, the Bible that we have today is a very, very small selection of writings from what was a very large selection of spiritual writings that Christians once had access to, and now and then didn't for a very, very long time, for at least 1.5 millennia. So we have access to them now. So I think it's time, because they're available, that we look again at what the original Christians believed, and whether or not it's worth reabsorbing some of those beliefs in the great chiasmic journey of return to the past, so that we can understand our present and move towards a better future.